Hello,
Okay.
everyone. This is Will Stagel with Artsel Technologies. I'm here today to introduce you to Rob Matley, the partner manager at Artsel, and Jeff Sandler, marketing manager at Epson. Both of those guys just returned from the Shared Services Outsourcing Week, a big event, and have lots of insights to share with you all today. So if you attended the event but got overwhelmed or weren't able to attend and wanted to gain some insights from what had to say at the show, that's why these two guys are here to talk with us. That event is typically attended by process owners and managers of a variety of back office business processes. Most of the time, they're looking for ways to incorporate technology and automation into the solutions that they offer to their stakeholders to keep costs low and keep everything efficient. And so, Rob, I know that you were there on behalf of Artsel exhibiting at the show. Tell me a little bit about the energy and excitement of the show and the kind of things that you learned and took away from the conversations you had.
Thanks, Will. Yeah, the show, there was a lot of energy. There was a lot of process owners who have spent the last year doing their due diligence to find out how to automate their business. It's amazing when you speak to leaders of some of the largest corporations in the world that are still doing things manually today. And we talked about how do I capture the data and create bots. Robotic process automation was a buzz at the conference, and most of these business leaders were in charge of 9 different departments, and they were looking for ways to automate that. Obviously, each department has different processes that they manage, but they all start with paper or some type of document, whether it's digital or an actual piece of paper. And we talked about the journey of that document. And I spoke to them about Artsel being the first mile in that journey. Capture it, figure out the business process, and then create a bot with their enterprise robotic process application.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear that a lot of those organizations are still relying on paper and manual processes, and clearly starting with that first leg, meaning getting rid of all the manual work around dealing with paper. I can see how that's a significant hurdle. Jeff, speaking of which, you working with Epson, obviously paper and digitizing that, and that first mile is also something that you're very familiar with. What kind of things did you see or learn at the show from talking to people there?
Great. Thanks, Will. First, I was very impressed at the caliber of the attendees that were there. Without naming names, I mean, they were all very recognizable, in many cases, extremely large, either U.S.-based or global brands. And the attendee level in terms of, where they sat organizationally was usually pretty high up, VP, director, that type of level. I was also secondarily struck by how many of them we're still somewhat along the road of trying to figure out how do they implement this technology, or they had been promised certain things in terms of the implementation, but hadn't quite realized the benefits yet. So they were still somewhat very much in process. That being said, our role, and again, is really as a device to help input where paper is still being utilized, which not surprisingly, is still fairly common in a lot of these organizations, i.e. they've got a mix of, some of it's been already automated and they no longer require a paper input. And in other cases, operationally at other parts of the organization, they still require it. So a lot of good discussion with a lot of different high-level folks from a lot of different organizations. And I think it was very interesting for me personally to understand where they stood in that journey, because coming into the show, not knowing the background or what to expect, I thought that I would see a lot more case studies and stories and from people that they were further along in terms of their automation process. And I was actually a little surprised that wasn't the case.
Hmm. Interesting. So it sounds like they at least understood that was the next step in their journey, right? To take a look at what automation opportunities were out there, what kind of solutions were available. So they knew that was the path they needed to go down. But I know Rob, I've heard you say that part of what they needed to figure out was just how to get there. So based on the conversations that you both had, what do you feel that the key challenges that they faced just in getting past where they are today and getting down that road of automation? Rob, what were the kind of things that you talked to people about, just in terms of next steps they could take, or challenges they had to overcome just to even get moving?
Yeah, well, some of the challenges that I heard was really, as I mentioned previously, some of them were responsible for 9 global departments, and they had a steering committee, and it sounded like the challenge was actually coming to conclusion what exactly needed to be automated and how. And so they knew what they just didn't know how. And I spoke to them about just having a 30-minute, 60-minute discovery call with them to talk about the challenges that they have internally and how Artzel can help them automate that. As I mentioned, again, the first mile in their journey to digital transformation.
Great. And Jeff, were you hearing the same kind of things from people you were talking to at the show?
Yeah, and in fact, I think, again, sort of taking from what Rob had said, I was surprised. I had a number of conversations with folks where they were still trying to get their hands around actually getting it done, and they were struggling. Either promises had been made and maybe promises unfulfilled, either by other vendors or by their expectations, maybe not meeting the reality of when they actually had to get things implemented. Or in many cases, these organizations were somewhat they were still in transition in the process of how do we get this done, and they were still trying to figure it out. So again, for me, that was surprising, because coming into the show, I really thought I would be encountering folks that were much further along, and there would be many, many more cases where they were already on to how do we take this to the next step, but they were still in what I would consider more phase 1. So from my perspective, there were still opportunities for us as a provider of hardware to enable them to still do capture, because they hadn't gotten to the point of doing any kind of robotic process. On the other hand, there were other folks that were there, but they still had to account for other parts of the organization that maybe hadn't caught up to the rest of the group. So if anything, as a big takeaway, is that if you look at this and think everybody's at the same level doing the same thing and it's consistent, that's totally not the case. And I was surprised and both gratified to hear that. So it's not as, there's no magic bullet. You can't just wave your magic wand and expect these problems to get solved. It really requires a lot of hard work. And what I saw were people who were grappling with that aggressively, but still having to face the everyday challenges, getting that done along with the rest of the work that they're responsible for.
Okay, great.
And well, if I could add to that, I met a couple of large organizations that, in the interim, had decided to use business process outsourcing for many of these manual processes, thinking if they added more bodies, they might expedite their process. Come to find out that after 3 or 4 months in, their process is actually now slower without using technology. And that's why they were keen on how do we automate it? How do we improve their process? That was an interesting conversation.
Great. Yeah, that is interesting. To what extent were you also talking to those outsourcing organizations? Were a lot of them present doing the same sort of, investigation, either on their own behalf or on their clients' behalf?
Yeah. So there were many business process outsourcing organizations there actually talking about using that as an example. And it's like, how do we utilize a technology like Artzel to improve their outsourcing work that they do? It's like, instead of adding bodies, add a business process automation tool that makes them more efficient and a more lucrative opportunity for their customers.
Right, because it sounds like if these outsourcing organizations don't get behind this themselves, there's a risk of their clients actually leapfrogging them, right? Adopting automation and now doing things more quickly than the outsource agency could do for them. So that's interesting.
Exactly. Yeah. And one of the customers that I spoke to said that we would love to still outsource this and then have them, in our example, still manage the invoices. So if there is something that needs to be modified, or if there's an approval, let them handle it. We still don't want to touch it. Let the BPO handle the automation and be more improving, if you will.
Okay. What about conversations about infrastructure? I would assume there's a mix, but were you getting into those more detailed conversations about firms that are trying to move to the cloud versus trying to do things with on-premise technologies? I know that Artsil offers a wide range of different implementations. How much did that come up in the context of the show?
The infrastructure was very prevalent in every conversation. There's still many people, depending on the type of organization it is, that demanded on-premise or a hybrid model, on-premise for some of their data and cloud for others. Others, especially for organizations that use Oracle applications. Oracle is pushing everybody to the cloud, and their first question is always, what is your path to the cloud?
Mm-hmm.
So they want to be sure that we had a cloud application, because they will no longer be able to store anything on-prem for if they utilize Oracle applications.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. And both of you, I think, mentioned that you had people coming to you who were responsible for multiple departments and obviously multiple operations and processes. And we often hear one or two examples, I think, of common use cases for process automation. Any examples that came to mind? What were the kind of things that people began a conversation with if they were talking about process automation? Rob, I think I heard you mention invoices as an example.
Many conversations were in many of the departments that they were talking about. There's a steering committee, and as I mentioned, the president of global services for a very large company was responsible for 9, and invoice automation was one of their primary plans.
Mm-hmm.
Sales orders. It's also there was a healthcare insurance company. They were looking to automate claims. They do a lot of outsourcing manually for claims, and if they can improve that efficiency, how do I do it? So those are pre-built solutions that Artsil has, so that it makes it easier for the phase 1 approach, install and start using within a matter of a couple of weeks, and then any other problematic business processes that are not built out, and we attempt at phase 2.
Jeff, were you kind of hearing the same thing? People talking about invoice automation, other kind of high volume paper-driven processes?
Yeah, Rob nailed it. Essentially, I mean, invoicing and accounts payable seem to be the most common one that was repeated very frequently. And it's funny because I keep thinking of a couple of key conversations with folks where, again, I use the description. They're just trying to get their hands around it. And in some cases, they were having to take a step back in order to take 2 steps forward. So the engagement that I saw taking place was, that Rob and Dave, both the other gentleman who was there from Artsil, were really engaging these people in a really positive way, because asking questions, trying to understand where they're having, pain points in their journey, and then being able to show how Artsil was going to be able to solve those. And again, it all starts with asking a few questions and then having that conversation. And folks actually almost like, wow, this sounds like this could work for me. So of course, obviously that's a little bit of a forecast of the future. But what for me was very gratifying was that there was definite engagement and folks really trying to say, hey, listen, this isn't, they weren't afraid to show the fact that they were struggling a little bit and looking for answers. And, they really wanted to try to see if there was some common area where they could get help. And that to me was sort of where the starting point of a lot of these discussions were.
Okay, fantastic. Well, Rob and Jeff, I want to thank you for joining me for a few minutes today and giving us a great recap of the Shared Services Outsourcing Week event, and looking forward to those of you who have joined us today to having those follow-up conversations and putting your visions into action for process automation.
Welcome, and thank you for your interest in Artsil. Artsil is once again proud to be a sponsor of the Shared Services Outsourcing Week this March in Orlando, Florida. This year, we are excited to be with our co-sponsor, Epson, and together we will be focusing on and demonstrating intelligent process automation. As we all know, business runs on documents, and documents are containers of information. The challenge is to extract relevant data and make it available for utilization in the most cost-efficient and expeditious means as possible. But often, there are labor-intensive, error-prone manual steps that precede the availability of this data. This inefficient process is the focus as to why companies desire to automate wherever they can. So at Artzel, we help to turn a manual process like this into an automated process like this. When you stop by and visit, we will review our action suite of automated solutions that can be quickly and painlessly implemented, as they come with out-of-box system components and document intelligence about specific document-based processes, which avoids long, drawn-out, and costly project implementations. As an example, Invoice Action has embedded intelligence as to what data to extract from invoices, validate this data, and match it against business rules and the most current information in your system, and if need be, route it to appropriate personnel to take action. Your organization may have many departments or locations that have paper-based documents that contain critical information required to initiate a transaction or a process flow. This is where Epson comes in. Epson is a global leader in making it easy to get paper-based information into a digital information workflow. Rather than enduring the wait and the cost to have paper processed for automation, Epson has the solutions to make it easy to bring automation to your documents. In particular, their network-based scanner. This has won many awards. It is very secure, it's easy to use, and does not require costly and complicated scanning software, making it very easy to send documents directly to Artzel Action Solutions. As a global trusted brand, no matter where your documents are or who uses them, Epson has a wide product line to meet all your capture needs cost-effectively. So, if you are looking to eliminate manual entries, lower operational costs, improve data accuracy, and increase productivity, please stop by and visit us. We would love to provide you a quick demo. See you in Orlando!